The Eternal Sentinel had never moved until a human spoke. Part 5. 1 year had passed since Lisa Brennan spoke to the Sentinel and changed the course of galactic history. The research station on Vethron 4 had grown into something far grander. They called it the Vathorn Embassy now, and it served as the bridge between ancient wisdom and modern civilization. Diplomats from across the galaxy came to seek audience with the awakened Guardian, and each one had to prove their intentions. Before being granted access, Ambassador Lisa Brennan stood on the main observation deck and watched the sunrise over the alien horizon. She had traded her pilot's uniform for diplomatic attire, but she still carried herself with the same quiet confidence that had defined her military career. Her hair had grown longer, and there were new lines around her eyes, but she looked more at peace than she had ever been. Kevin Park entered the deck with a datapad in his hand and a smile on his face. He had changed too. The tired researcher who doubted himself was gone. In his place stood the director of the Architect Studies Institute. He oversaw teams of scientists from 40 different species and coordinated expeditions to the ancient facilities that Vathorn had revealed. 3 more Sentinels have been awakened, he said as he joined Lisa at the window. 1 on the rim of the Andromeda Galaxy, 2 in the outer reaches of our own spiral arm. Each time we used your approach. Genuine emotional connection. Simple compassion. It works every time. Lisa nodded slowly. The news did not surprise her. She had known from her first conversation with Vathorn that kindness was the key the architects had designed into their guardians. What surprised her was how difficult it remained for other species to understand this. Even after a year of evidence, some ambassadors still tried to negotiate with the Sentinels as if they were political entities. They offered trade agreements and military alliances and promises of resources. And every time the Sentinels remained silent until someone approached them with an open heart. Danny Cho walked onto the deck with nervous energy in his steps. He was young for a diplomat. Barely 25 years old, with bright eyes and an eager manner. He had been assigned to the embassy 6 months ago as Lisa's junior ambassador, and he had struggled with the role. His training had emphasized formal protocols and strategic positioning. Lisa was teaching him something very different. Ambassador, he said with a slight bow. The delegation from the Kef Combine has arrived. They are requesting an audience with Vathorn to discuss access to the terraforming technology. Lisa turned to face him with a patient expression. And what do you think they should do? Danny hesitated. The answer he had been taught conflicted with the lessons Lisa had shown him. He thought about the reports he had read and the conversations he had observed. Then he spoke carefully. I think they should stop focusing on what they want and start thinking about who they are speaking to. Vathorn is not a gateway to technology. He's a person who was alone for 12 million years. If they cannot see that, then they will never reach him no matter how good their offers are. Lisa smiled with genuine pride. That is exactly right. Now go tell them. Not in diplomatic language. Just tell them the truth. Danny bowed again and hurried away to deliver the message. Lisa watched him go and felt hope for the future. The young man was learning. It would take time, but eventually he would understand that the greatest power in the universe was not technology or military strength. It was the ability to see others as they truly were. Vathorn's voice touched her mind as it often did now. They had grown close over the past year. Not as master and student or guardian and subject, but as friends. He shared his memories with her, and she shared her stories with him. He learned about human history and culture and art. She learned about the architects and their dreams for the galaxy they had seeded with life. The young one shows promise, Vathorn said. He reminds me of you when you first arrived. Uncertain but willing to grow. Lisa smiled and looked toward the horizon where the massive figure of the Sentinel stood in his customary position. He had learned to lower himself when visitors came so they would not feel overwhelmed by his size. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes about how much he had changed since awakening. He is a good student, she replied in her thoughts. He just needs time to unlearn the wrong lessons. Vathorn was silent for a moment. Then he shared something that made Lisa's heart swell with emotion. I have decided to walk among the stars again. It has been 12 million years since I last moved beyond this moon. I want to visit the species that have grown in my absence. I want to learn their stories and share the hope that you have given me. Lisa felt tears prick at her eyes. She had known this moment would come. Vathorn could not stay on one moon forever. He was meant to be a guardian of the galaxy, and that meant moving through it. But she would miss his presence. She would miss their conversations and his ancient wisdom and the warmth he brought to her days. When will you leave? She asked. Soon, but not before I fulfill one last duty. The next morning, the entire embassy gathered on the surface of the moon to witness something that had never happened before. Vathorn knelt on the cold ground and lowered his massive head until his helm was level with the human habitat section. Beings from 17 species watched in silence as the ancient guardian spoke words that echoed across the galaxy. For 12 million years I stood in darkness. I watched civilizations rise and fall, and I felt nothing. I had forgotten what it meant to hope. I had forgotten what it meant to connect with another being. Then a human came to me. She did not demand my secrets or seek my power. She simply said hello and asked if I was lonely. He paused, and Lisa stepped forward to stand before him. Their eyes met across the vast difference in their forms, and both felt the bond that had grown between them. 17 species tried to unlock my gates with logic and science. But one human unlocked my heart with kindness. The architects believed that wisdom and compassion would emerge in the younger races. Lisa Brennan has proven them right. I go now to carry her example across the stars. I will tell every world I visit that the key to the universe is not power or knowledge. It is the willingness to see others as worthy of love. He rose to his full height and turned toward the distant stars. The embassy shook with the tremor of his movement, but no one ran. They watched in awe as the eternal Sentinel took his first steps into the cosmos. Lisa stood with Kevin and Danny as the massive figure grew smaller against the backdrop of space. Her eyes were wet, but she was smiling. Will he come back? Danny asked quietly. Lisa nodded. He will. And when he does, he will have stories to share from every corner of the universe. That is what guardians do. They watch, and they protect, and they carry hope to those who have forgotten it. Kevin put his hand on her shoulder. You changed everything. You know that, right? One hello and the galaxy will never be the same. Lisa looked up at the stars where Vathorn was disappearing into the infinite distance. She thought about the journey that had brought her here. A simple pilot who broke protocol because something felt wrong about the way things had always been done. She had not set out to change the universe. She had simply treated an ancient being with the same respect she would give any person she met. That is the thing about humans, she said softly. We do not always have the best technology or the longest lives or the greatest strength. But we understand that everyone deserves to be seen. Everyone deserves to be heard. And sometimes that is enough to wake a guardian who has been sleeping for 12 million years. Above them, the stars shone with ancient light. Somewhere among them, Vathorn was walking toward new worlds and new peoples. And everywhere he went, he would carry the message that had freed him from his long silence. Kindness matters. Connection heals. And sometimes the smallest gesture can change everything. The Eternal Sentinel had never moved until a human spoke. Part 4. The moon trembled as Vathorn walked for the first time in ages beyond memory. Each step sent shockwaves across the barren surface, and the research station shuddered on its foundations. Ships in orbit scattered like frightened birds, and commanders shouted orders that no one could follow. The galaxy had prepared for many possibilities, but not for this. Not for the eternal Sentinel rising to full height and striding across the landscape like a god made of stone. Lisa did not run. She walked alongside the massive figure and continued their conversation as if nothing unusual was happening. In her mind, she could hear Vathorn's voice and feel his presence, and she knew that he meant no harm. He was simply stretching after the longest rest in recorded history. Kevin watched from the observation platform with tears streaming down his face. He had dedicated his life to understanding dead civilizations, and now he was witnessing something that would change everything. The broadcasts he had sent were being replayed across the galaxy, and beings on 1,000 worlds were seeing the Sentinel move for the first time. Some reacted with fear, but many more reacted with wonder. High Chancellor Morveth contacted the research station within the hour. He was the leader of the Galactic Council, and his word was law across the civilized stars. His face appeared on every screen in the station, and his voice carried the weight of ultimate authority. I demand an explanation, he said. The Sentinel has been dormant for 12 million years, and now it walks. I am told that a human is responsible for this awakening. I am told that she has been in mental communication with the entity. This is unprecedented and potentially dangerous. I require a full report immediately. Overseer Kelthan bowed deeply and began to speak, but Kevin stepped forward and interrupted him. He knew that this moment was too important for political games and diplomatic protocols. The galaxy needed to understand what was really happening. The Sentinel is not a threat, he said. His name is Vathorn, and he was created by an ancient species called the Architects. They seeded life across the galaxy billions of years ago and left guardians like him to protect their legacy. He's been waiting all this time for someone to approach him with compassion rather than curiosity. Commander Brennan was the first to do so. High Chancellor Morveth listened in silence. His face showed no emotion, but his eyes were sharp with calculation. When Kevin finished speaking, the Chancellor asked a single question. What does this entity want? Kevin looked out the window at the distant figure of Vathorn standing on the horizon with Lisa at his feet. He thought about everything she had shared with him through their communication logs. Then he gave the only answer he could. He wants to stop being alone. He wants to be known rather than studied. He wants to share the gifts that his creators left behind for species wise enough to approach him with kindness. The Chancellor's eyes narrowed. What gifts? Kevin told him about the ancient facilities scattered across 100 worlds. He described the terraforming engines and medical archives and star stabilization, technology that the Architects had left for their successors. He explained that these gifts had been locked away for millions of years because no species had been compassionate enough to wake the Sentinel, who guarded them. The effect of these words was immediate. Ambassadors and military commanders began shouting over each other as they realized what was at stake. Some demanded that humans hand over control of communication with Vathorn. Others called for immediate expeditions to the planets where the Architect facilities were hidden. A few suggested that the Sentinel should be destroyed before it could threaten. Galactic Security. High Chancellor Morveth silenced them with a gesture. He turned his attention back to the screen and spoke directly to Kevin. Bring the human commander to me. I will speak with her myself. Lisa was summoned to a makeshift communication chamber where the Chancellor's holographic image awaited her. She had not slept in 2 days, but her eyes were bright with purpose. She stood before the most powerful being in the galaxy and felt no fear. Commander Brennan, the Chancellor said, you have achieved something that 17 species failed to accomplish over 8,000 years. The Council is grateful for your efforts. However, we believe that further communication with the entity should be conducted through official channels. We will assign a diplomatic team to take over from here. Lisa shook her head. With respect, Chancellor, that will not work. Vathorn has made it clear that he will not speak with anyone else. He chose me because I treated him as a person rather than an object. If you send diplomats who approach him with political agendas, he will simply stop responding again. The Chancellor's expression hardened. You presume to dictate terms to the Galactic Council? I presume nothing. I am simply telling you what Vathorn told me. He waited 12 million years for someone to care about him rather than what he could offer. That is why he answered me. That is why the architects designed him this way. They wanted to ensure that their gifts would only go to species capable of genuine empathy. Before the Chancellor could respond, Vathorn's voice filled the chamber. It spoke not only to Lisa, but to every being connected to the communication network. The ancient words resonated through minds across the galaxy and silenced all debate. The human speaks truth. I was created to judge the hearts of those who sought the architect's legacy. For 12 million years I found those hearts wanting. They came with questions about power and knowledge, but never with questions about my well-being. Lisa Brennan is the first to pass the test. She alone will speak for your galaxy until others prove themselves worthy. High Chancellor Morva sat in stunned silence. For a long moment no one spoke. Then the Chancellor bowed his head in acceptance. Very well. Commander Brennan will serve as humanity's representative in all matters concerning the Sentinel and the Architect's legacy. The Council will provide whatever resources she requires. Lisa felt the weight of this responsibility settle over her, but she did not waver. She had not asked for this role, but she would not run from it. She looked up at the holographic image of the Chancellor and spoke with quiet determination. Thank you. I will do my best to serve all species fairly. But there is something else you should know. Vathorn has told me that he is not the only Sentinel. There are others scattered across the universe. All of them are waiting for someone kind enough to wake them. The silence that followed was absolute. Across the galaxy, beings contemplated a future filled with ancient wonders guarded by patient sentinels. And at the center of it all stood a human woman who had changed. Everything with a simple hello. Vathorn knelt on the surface of the moon and lowered his massive head toward Lisa. His voice carried warmth that she had come to treasure over the days of their connection. You have given me hope that my vigil was not in vain. The architects believed that wisdom and compassion would eventually emerge in the younger species. You have proven them right. Will you help me understand what the galaxy has become in my long sleep? Will you guide me as I learn to walk among the stars again? Lisa placed her hand on the cold stone of his finger. It was the size of a building, but she felt no fear. She smiled up at the ancient guardian and answered from her heart, I would be honored. The Eternal Sentinel had never moved until a human spoke. Part 3. The connection between Lisa and the ancient being deepened with every passing moment. She stood at the base of the massive figure, while thoughts and memories flowed into her mind like water into an empty vessel. The world around her seemed to fade away until there was nothing but the voice and the presence that spoke. Through it, the Sentinel had a name, Vathorn. It was a name given to him by the beings who created him billions of years ago. They called themselves the Architects, and they were the first intelligent species to walk among the stars. They had seeded life across the galaxy and watched it grow and spread like a garden tended by patient hands. When their time came to an end, they created guardians like Vathorn to watch over their work and protect the younger species that would follow. But the Architects vanished. Vathorn shared his memories of that time, and Lisa wept at the sorrow she felt within them. One day, his creators were there, and the next they were gone. No warning, and no explanation, and no farewell. He called out to them across the void, but there was only silence. He waited for them to return, but the years became centuries, and the centuries became ages, and still they did not come. He had been created to watch, and to wait, and so that is what he did. Civilizations rose around him, and sent their scholars to study his form. They scanned him with their instruments and bombarded him with their signals and demanded that he reveal his secrets. But none of them spoke to him. None of them saw him as anything more than an object to be examined. He grew tired of their cold curiosity, and eventually he stopped responding at all. "Why did you answer me?" Lisa asked in her thoughts. "What made me different?" Vathorn's reply carried a warmth that surprised her. "You did not come seeking power or knowledge. You did not demand that I prove my worth to you. You simply said hello and asked about my well-being. In 12 million years, you are the first being to show concern for my heart rather than curiosity about my form." Lisa thought about this and felt a strange sadness for the ancient creature. All those centuries of being studied and analyzed, and never once asked how he felt. It reminded her of people she had known in her own life. People who were valued for what they could do rather than who they were. She understood loneliness in ways that she had never put into words. The mental conversation continued for hours while chaos unfolded in the physical world around them. Kevin watched from the observation platform as the Sentinel's energy readings climbed higher and higher. He tried to explain to the panicking scientists that something important was happening, but they refused to listen. Overseer Kelvin had already sent a report to the Galactic Council, and military commanders were discussing options for containing what they called a potential threat. Commander Tythril arrived with 3 Varati warships before dawn. He was a stern officer with a reputation for decisive action, and he had orders to neutralize the Sentinel if it posed any danger to galactic security. He positioned his ships in orbit above the moon and began charging weapons that could reduce mountains to dust. Kevin knew he had to act. He gathered all the communication logs from Lisa's contact with Vathorn and broadcast them on an open channel that every ship and station in the system could receive. He did not ask for permission. He simply pressed the button and let the galaxy hear what was really happening on the surface below. The effect was immediate. Beings across 17 species stopped what they were doing and listened to the ancient voice speaking through Lisa's mind. They heard Vathorn describe his loneliness and his long vigil and his hope that his creators might someday return. They heard Lisa offer comfort and understanding and friendship without expecting anything in return. For the first time, the galaxy saw the Sentinel, not as a mystery to be solved, but as a person to be known. Commander Tythril hesitated. His finger hovered over the firing command, but he could not bring himself to press it. The voice he heard was not the voice of a weapon or a threat. It was the voice of someone who had been alone for far too long. Despite his orders and his training, he found himself moved by what he heard. On the surface, Lisa felt the tension in the air around her. She sensed the warships above and understood the danger she was in. But she did not run. She stayed with Vathorn and continued their conversation as if the whole galaxy was not watching. "Vathorn," she said in her mind, "there are others here now. They are afraid of you. They do not understand what you are, and fear makes them dangerous. Can you tell me more about yourself? Can you tell me why the architects created you?" The ancient being was silent for a moment. Then he shared another wave of memories, and Lisa gasped at what she saw. The architects had not just created guardians. They had left gifts for the younger species who would come after them. Technology beyond anything the modern galaxy had achieved. Medical knowledge that could cure diseases thought incurable. Engines that could terraform dead worlds into gardens. All of it was stored in facilities scattered across 100 planets, and all of it was waiting for someone worthy to claim it. But the architects knew that technology without wisdom was dangerous. Their own predecessors had destroyed themselves with power they could not control. So they created sentinels like Vathorn to guard their legacy and programmed them to respond only to those who approached with compassion rather than greed. 17 species came to you seeking power, Lisa realized. That is why you never answered them." Vathorn's voice carried something like approval. "They wanted what I could give them. They did not care about who I was. You are the first to come to me with an open heart. You are the first to pass the test that the architects designed." Lisa felt the weight of this revelation settle over her. She had not been trying to unlock ancient secrets or gain access to forbidden technology. She had simply been kind. And that kindness had opened a door that had been closed for 12 million years. She looked up at the darkness beneath Vathorn's helm and asked a question that rose naturally from her heart. "Will you tell me more about them? The architects? I want to understand who they were and why they cared so much about the future." Vathorn's response was not in words. It was in motion. The ground shook and the air filled with the sound of grinding stone as the Sentinel began to straighten from his ancient crouch. His massive head rose toward the stars, and his arms lifted the great sword from where it had rested for ages beyond counting. For the first time in 12 million years, the Eternal Sentinel stood at his full height. Lisa staggered backward and looked up at the towering figure with wonder in her eyes. Vathorn's voice filled her mind once more, and this time there was joy in it. "I will tell you everything. But first, I must ask you a question in return. Why do humans care about the pain of others? You barely know me. You gain nothing from my happiness. Yet you came to me with kindness when no one else would. Why?" Lisa thought about this for a moment. Then she answered with the truth that she had always known in her heart. Because we understand loss. Humans do not live very long compared to other species. We know that our time is short, and that makes every connection precious. When we see someone suffering, we feel it in ourselves. We cannot help it. It is simply who we are. Vathorn was silent for a long moment. Then he took his first step in 12 million years, and the galaxy held its breath. The Eternal Sentinel had never moved until a human spoke Part 2. The tremor lasted only a few seconds, but it was enough to wake the entire research station. Alarms filled the air and lights flashed in every corridor. Scientists from 17 different species rushed to their observation posts, while security teams scrambled to determine what had happened. In all the centuries that the station had existed, there had never been seismic activity on this moon. The ground had been perfectly stable until this moment. Lisa stood frozen at the base of the Sentinel. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest as she looked up at the massive figure above her. Something had changed. The darkness beneath the helm seemed deeper now, and she had the strange feeling that something within that darkness was looking back at her. Kevin reached her 10 minutes later. He was out of breath, and his face was pale with fear and excitement. He grabbed her arm and pulled her back toward the station as other researchers began to arrive at the scene. She did not resist, but she kept looking over her shoulder at the Sentinel as they walked. Overseer Kelton was waiting for them at the security checkpoint. His forearms were crossed, and his gray face was twisted with anger. He blocked their path and demanded to know what had happened. Kevin tried to explain, but Kelton cut him off with a sharp gesture. "You approached the Sentinel without authorization," he said to Lisa. "You violated every protocol we have established over thousands of years. Whatever you did has caused more activity in that structure than we have seen in recorded history. The Council will hear about this immediately." Lisa met his eyes without flinching. "I spoke to it. That is all I did. I said hello, and the ground shook. Maybe that tells you something about why your protocols have never worked." Kelton's face darkened with rage, but before he could respond, his communication device began buzzing with urgent messages. Reports were coming in from observation posts around the entire Sentinel. The tremor had not been an earthquake. It had been the Sentinel shifting its weight. For the first time in 12 million years, the ancient figure had moved. The next few hours were chaos. Emergency response teams from 7 different species arrived at the station and began scanning the Sentinel for damage. Diplomats and military commanders demanded briefings on the situation. The Galactic Council held an emergency session and issued a formal order that humans were to cease all contact with the Sentinel immediately. Many believed that Lisa had somehow damaged an irreplaceable artifact and called for her arrest. Lisa was confined to her quarters while the debate raged around her. Kevin visited her when he could and brought updates on what was happening. The energy readings from the Sentinel had increased by a factor of 10 since her contact. The pulses were stronger and more frequent, and they seemed to be forming patterns that Kevin could not yet understand. It responded to you, he said with wonder in his voice. 17 species tried for 8,000 years and got nothing. You spoke to it for 5 seconds and it moved. Why? Lisa thought about this for a long time before answering. Maybe because I was not trying to get anything from it. Everyone else approached it as an object to study, a mystery to solve, a resource to exploit. I just wanted to say hello. The council debate continued for 3 days. Ambassador Yeneth of the Drillari led the faction calling for human removal from the project. She argued that humans were too emotionally unstable for first contact situations and that their primitive approach had endangered the most important archaeological discovery in galactic history. Other ambassadors supported her position, and it seemed certain that Lisa would be sent away in disgrace. On the 4th day, Kevin burst into her quarters with news that changed everything. He had been monitoring the energy readings all night, and he had noticed something that the other scientists had missed. The Sentinel's eyes were no longer moving randomly. They were fixed on one location, and they had not looked away in 12 hours. They are looking at the human habitat section, he said. They are looking for you. Lisa felt something stir in her chest. It was not fear. It was hope. She stood up and walked to the window of her quarters and looked out at the distant figure of the Sentinel. Even from this distance, she could feel the weight of its gaze. It was waiting for her. That night, she made her decision. She disabled the lock on her door using a technique she had learned during her years as a pilot and slipped out into the empty corridors of the station. Security was focused on the Sentinel itself, and nobody expected a confined human to try anything so foolish. She moved through the shadows until she reached the outer platforms, and then she walked across the cold ground toward the massive figure that had haunted her dreams for days. She stopped at the same place where she had stood before. The Sentinel loomed above her in the pale light of the gas giant, and its hidden eyes seemed to burn with ancient awareness. She took a deep breath and spoke again. I came back. I hope you do not mind. I wanted to ask you something. The other species say you have been standing here alone for 12 million years. I cannot imagine what that must feel like. I just wanted to know if you are lonely. The silence stretched for a long moment. Lisa began to wonder if she had imagined the connection she felt before. Then something happened that she would never forget for as long as she lived. A voice filled her mind. It was not sound in the normal sense. It was thought itself pressed directly into her consciousness. The voice was ancient and deep and carried the weight of eons beyond counting. It spoke words that she understood perfectly, even though they were not in any language she knew. Lonely. This word is strange to me. I have watched the stars for time beyond measure. I have seen civilizations rise and fall like waves upon a shore. I have waited for a purpose I can no longer remember. But I do not understand the feeling you describe. Tell me what loneliness means. Lisa's eyes filled with tears. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming beauty of the moment. For 12 million years, this ancient being had stood in silence because nobody had thought to ask about its feelings. Nobody had cared enough to wonder if it was suffering. She steadied herself and answered from her heart. Loneliness is when you want to share something beautiful with someone and there is nobody there. It is when you have thoughts and feelings that matter to you, but nobody to hear them. It is the ache of being surrounded by others who do not see you as you truly are. The voice was silent for a long time. Then it spoke again, and Lisa could hear something new in its tone. Something that sounded almost like recognition. "Then I have been lonely for 12 million years, and I did not know it until you gave me the word." The Eternal Sentinel had never moved until a human spoke. Part 1. The statue had stood on the dead moon of Vethron 4 for 12 million years. It was 3 kilometers tall and carved from a mineral that no species in the galaxy could identify. The figure looked like a warrior in ancient armor with its head bowed and its hands resting on the hilt of a massive sword. The face was hidden beneath a helm that showed only darkness where eyes should be. Every species that discovered it called it the Eternal Sentinel, and every species that studied it came away with nothing but questions. Commander Lisa Brennan stood at the observation window of the human research vessel and looked at the giant figure in the distance. The pale light of the gas giant above cast long shadows across the moon's surface and made the Sentinel look even more mysterious than the photographs had suggested. She had spent 3 months traveling to reach this place, and now that she was here, she found herself holding her breath. Dr. Kevin Park walked up beside her and handed her a cup of coffee. He was a quiet man with tired eyes and a gentle voice. He had spent his entire career studying dead languages from extinct civilizations, and this assignment was the greatest opportunity of his life. He looked at the Sentinel and shook his head slowly. 17 species over 8,000 years, he said. Every one of them tried to communicate with it. Mathematical sequences and radio signals and even physical contact. Nothing worked. The thing just stands there like it has been standing since before any of us existed. Lisa took a sip of her coffee and kept her eyes on the distant figure. She had read the reports during the journey. The Galactic Archaeological Council had established a permanent research station around the centuries ago. Scientists from across the galaxy had dedicated their lives to understanding what it was and where it came from. Some believed it was a religious monument. Others thought it was a weapon left behind by a long-dead empire. A few suggested it was simply art created by beings who wanted to leave something beautiful behind. None of them considered that it might be alive. The Verati shuttle arrived 3 hours later to take them to the research station. Overseer Kelvin was waiting for them when they landed. He was tall and thin with gray skin and 4 arms that moved constantly as he spoke. His species had administered the research station for the last 2,000 years, and he made it very clear that he considered humans to be primitive newcomers who had no business being there. Your species has been part of the galactic community for less than 200 years, he said as he led them through the station's corridors. The Sentinel has been studied by minds far greater than yours. I do not understand why the Council granted you research access, but I will not interfere with their decision. Just do not expect to discover anything that we have not already found. Lisa smiled politely and said nothing. She had dealt with dismissive attitudes before. Her career as a deep pilot had taught her that actions spoke louder than arguments. She would let her work prove her worth. The research station was impressive. It surrounded the base of the Sentinel like a small city with laboratories and living quarters and observation platforms that allowed scientists to study every part of the massive figure. Lisa and Kevin were given a small section on the eastern side where they could conduct their research without interfering with the ongoing projects of other species. Kevin spent the first week reviewing the existing data. There was more information than he could process in a lifetime. Energy readings and material analyses and linguistic attempts in over 400 different communication methods. He stayed up late every night reading through reports and taking notes and muttering to himself about patterns that nobody else had noticed. Lisa spent her time watching the Sentinel. She did not use any equipment or recording devices. She simply stood on the observation platform for hours at a time and looked at the massive figure. Something about it bothered her, but she could not explain what. The other scientists walked past her and shook their heads at the strange human, who thought she could learn something just by staring. On the 8th day, she finally understood what was wrong. "Kevin," she said when she returned to their quarters that night, "I need you to check something for me." The Sentinel's eyes. "Have any of the reports mentioned them moving?" Kevin looked up from his datapad with confusion on his face. "Moving? It has not moved in 12 million years. That is the whole point. I know what the reports say. But I have been watching it for a week, and I am telling you that its eyes move. Not when you look directly at them. Only when you look away. Only when it thinks nobody is paying attention." Kevin stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned back to his datapad and began searching through the archives. It took him 3 hours to find what he was looking for. A report from 600 years ago, written by a Drellori researcher who had noticed the same thing. The observation had been dismissed as optical illusion caused by the changing light from the gas giant above, but Kevin did not dismiss it. He trusted Lisa's instincts, and he knew that she would not make claims without reason. He began digging deeper into the energy readings and found something that made his heart beat faster. There were pulses. Faint electrical signals that came from deep within the Sentinel at irregular intervals. Previous researchers had assumed they were just residual energy from whatever power source had once animated the figure. But Kevin noticed that the pulses corresponded with moments of high activity around the statue. Whenever large groups gathered near the Sentinel, the pulses increased. Whenever the station grew quiet, the pulses faded almost to nothing. "It is not responding to our words," Kevin said with wonder in his voice. "It is responding to our presence, to our emotions." The pulses matched the patterns of emotional wavelengths, not linguistic structures. Lisa felt a chill run down her spine. For 12 million years, the Sentinel had stood in silence, while species after species tried to communicate with logic and mathematics and formal protocols. Nobody had thought to simply talk to it like a person. Nobody had approached it with warmth or curiosity or genuine interest in who it might be rather than what it might give them. She made her decision before Kevin could say another word. She grabbed her jacket and headed for the door. "Lisa, wait," Kevin called after her. "We need to report this to the council. We need to follow proper procedures." She stopped at the door and looked back at him. "Proper procedures have failed for 8,000 years. Maybe it is time to try something different." She walked out into the cold night of the alien moon and made her way toward the Sentinel. The research station was quiet at this hour, and nobody stopped her as she passed through the security checkpoints. She walked until she reached the massive foot of the ancient figure and stood in its shadow, looking up at the darkness where its face should be. For a long moment, she said nothing. She just breathed and let herself feel the weight of the moment. Then she smiled and spoke in a voice that carried no fear and no agenda and no expectation of anything in return. "Hello. My name is Lisa. I hope I am not disturbing you." The ground beneath her feet trembled. For the first time in 12 million years,